It's great to be here. My mother, when she was pregnant with her brood of five, well, one at a time with her brood of five, used to go into the reading room of the British Museum hoping that they'd absorb good things. David and his partner have their 9-day-old child here, so I feel a special responsibility to be interesting. So anyway, thank you for coming. I'm going to assume that most of you know why you're here, so I won't labor you with an introduction. But a few details. David Bezmozgis was born in Riga, Latvia, immigrated to Canada with his family in 1980 when he was 6. The family settled in North Toronto in one of those dense high-rises around Bathurst and Finch that many of you will have passed by, perhaps less know as the first stop of many immigrant communities as they come to Canada. I did have the chance to wander that area a little bit with David a few years ago. And I'm trying to remember, you were showing me the bells on the front of the apartment and how the names were changing, and the names are now... But there were some Korean names, I think. Right. So the doorbells of these high-rises become a barometer of the changing immigrant nature of Canada, and there are still many Russian ones, but now also Korean and Thai and so on. It's very interesting to see. David's fiction is keenly concentrated on the experiences of his own Russian Jewish heritage and the experiences of the Berman family, you will remember from Natasha and other stories. This novel, The Free World, is set in 1978 and revolves around the Krasnetsky family as they wait for several, for the 6 months that we're witness to, in a kind of limbo, stopping in Vienna and then moving to Rome and waiting really for passage to any country that will have them. That might be Australia, Canada, the United States, Israel, the other place so-called, and Germany for some. In Israel, Menachem Begin and Anwar Sadat are sort of meandering their way to peace through the Camp David Accords, and that provides something of a backdrop. But though the arc of the novel takes this short half year, its span is much greater because through the memories and recollections of the family, Samuel, the father, Alec and Carl, the kids and their wives, Paulina and Rosa, but principally Samuel's reminiscences of his uncle, his father, his grandfather, and the part they played in a series of wars around Latvia, and of course fighting with and then a little betrayed by the Soviet Union. The embrace is much greater. It's a fascinating world to have displayed this way, not terribly familiar to many of us. Latvia is part of a territory in what became the Soviet Union, which has an extraordinary history of being fought over, passed through, and those dates mean a lot to Samuel especially. They make friends as they wait for passage to Canada for the Krasnetskys, to America for someone else. There's Joseph Roydman, who's a friend the father makes, who's lost a leg during the Second World War. He's a violinist. He's busy composing an opera about Fanny Kaplan, Fanny Kaplan, who was executed after trying to assassinate Lenin. A disputed story of history, and others, a young man from whom they rent the apartment, Lyova, who was fought as a tank gunner in Prague and then again in Israel, and laments his experience of having to point that gun at innocent families, and an experience he cannot bear. So he's sitting there waiting to go to America. And in this confusion, the group has to resort to all kinds of chicaneries and trade. Some get jobs, but need to get by in this pressured time. I'm going to stop there. I think I'll let David pick up, and he's going to read you a short passage, not much, but enough to give you a flavor of his flawless prose, and then we'll have a conversation.
Hi, it's nice to be back, and I will also try not to bore my 9-day-old child. Thank you, Noah. Thank you, Tina. It's nice to be here. So I'll read just the first chapter, which is not very long, to give you a taste of who these people are, what the family is, and where they're getting themselves into. So to begin, as Noah was indicating, the book it follows this entire family, but it's told in 3 voices. So there are 3 third-person narratives. One is Samuel, who is the patriarch of this family. The other is Alec, who's his youngest son, and who you'll hear from. And the third is Alec's wife, Paulina, who is with them. She's not Jewish, Russian, and is along on this trip under her own circumstances. But here's how the book begins. Alec Krasnansky stood on the platform of Vienna's Western Terminal, while all around him, the representatives of Soviet Jewry from Tallinn to Tashkent roiled, snarled, and elbowed to deposit their belongings onto the waiting train. His own family roiled among them, his parents, his wife, his nephews, his sister-in-law, and particularly his brother Karl, worked furiously with the suitcases and duffel bags. He should have been helping them, but his attention was drawn farther down the platform by 2 pretty tourists. One was a brunette, Mediterranean and voluptuous, the other petite and blonde. In combination, they attested, as though by design, to the scope of the world's beauty and plenitude. Both girls were barefoot, their leather sandals arranged in tidy pairs beside them. Alec traced a line of smooth, tanned skin from heel to calf to thigh, interrupted, ultimately, by the frayed edge of cut-off blue jeans. Above the cut-off jeans, the girls wore thin, sleeveless shirts. They sat on their backpacks and leaned casually against each other. Their faces were lovely and vacant. They seemed beyond train schedules and obligations. People sped past them. The Russian circus performed its ludicrous act several meters away, but they paid no attention. Alec assumed they were Americans. He guessed they were in their early 20s. He was 26, but he could pass for younger. In school and university, he had run track, and he retained a trim runner's build. He also had his father's dark, wavy hair. From the time Alec was a boy, he had been aware of his effect on women. In his presence, they often became exaggerated versions of themselves. The maternal ones became more maternal. The crude ones became cruder. The shy ones shyer. They wanted only that he not make them feel foolish, and were grateful when he did not. In his experience, much of what was good in life could be traced to a woman's gratitude. Looking at the 2 girls, Alec had to resist the urge to approach them. It could be the simplest thing in the world. He had studied English. He needed only to walk over and say, "Hello, are you Americans?" And they needed only to respond, "Yes." "Where in America do you live?" "Chicago." "And where are you from?" "Riga, Latvia, the Soviet Union." "How interesting. We have never met anyone from the Soviet Union before. Where are you traveling to?" "Chicago." "No. Is this true?" "Yes, it is true. I am traveling to Chicago." "Will this be your first time in Chicago?" "Yes. It will be my first time in Chicago. Can you tell me about Chicago?" "Yes, we can tell you about it. Please sit down with us. We will tell you everything about Chicago." "Thank you. You are welcome." Alec felt Carl's hand on his shoulder. What's the matter with you? Nothing. We have 7 minutes to finish loading everything onto the train. He followed Carl back to where their parents were arranging the suitcases so that Carl and Alec could continue forcing them through the window of the compartment. Near them, an elderly couple sat dejectedly on their bags. Others worked around them, avoiding not only helping them, but also looking them in the face. Old people sitting piteously on luggage had become a familiar spectacle. I see them, Carl said. Move your ass, and if there's time, we'll help them. Alec bent into the remaining pile of suitcases and duffel bags on the platform. Each seemed heavier than the last. For 6 adults, they had 20 articles of luggage, crammed with goods destined for the bazaars of Rome. Linens, toys, samovars, ballet shoes, nesting dolls, leather Latvian handicrafts, nylon stockings, lacquer boxes, pocket knives, camera equipment, picture books, and opera glasses. One particularly heavy suitcase held Alec's big commercial investment, dozens of symphonic records. First hefting the bags onto his shoulder and then sliding them along the outside of the train, Alec managed to pass them up to the compartment and into the arms of Paulina and Rosa, his and Carl's wives. Carl turned to the old couple. All right, citizens, can we offer you a hand? The old man rose from his suitcase, stood erect, and answered with the formality of a party official or university lecturer. We would be very obliged to you. If you'll allow, my wife has with her a box of chocolates. It's not necessary. Not even a little something for the children. Carl's 2 boys had poked their heads out of the compartment window. Do as you like, but they're like animals at the zoo. I suggest you mind your fingers. Alec and Carl shouldered the old people's suitcases and passed them into the compartment. Alec noticed the way the old man looked at Paulina. This is your wife? Yes. A true Russian beauty. I appreciate the compliment, though she might disagree. Emigration is not exactly cosmetic. Absolutely false. The Russian woman blossoms under toil. The Russian man can drink and fight, but our former country was built on the back of the Russian woman. What country wasn't? That may be so, but I don't know about other countries. I was a Soviet citizen. To my generation, this meant something. We sacrificed our youth, our most productive years, our faith. And in the end, they robbed us of everything. This is why it does my heart proud to see your wife. Every Jew should have taken with him a Russian bride, if only to deny them to the alcoholics. I'm an old man, but if the law had allowed, I would have taken 10 wives myself, real Russian women, because that country couldn't survive 5 minutes without them. The old man's wife, the incontrovertible product of shtetl breeding, listened to her husband's speech with spousal indifference. There was nothing, her expression declared, that she hadn't heard him say 100 times. To women, Alex said. When we get to Rome, we should drink to it. Alec helped the old couple onto the car and scrambled up as it began to edge forward. He squeezed past people in the narrow passageway and found his family crammed in with their belongings. Perched on a pile of duffel bags, his father frowned in Alec's direction. What were you talking about with that old rooster? The greatness of the Russian woman, your favorite subject. He almost missed the train. Samuel Krasnansky turned his head and considered their circumstances. The compartments are half the size. This was true, Alec thought. Say what you want about the Soviet Union, but the sleeping compartments were bigger. You want to go back because of the bigger compartments? Carl asked. What do you care about what I want? Samuel said. Samuel Krasnansky said nothing else between Vienna and Rome. He sat in silence beside his wife and eventually fell asleep.
So why did you concentrate, or what led you to concentrate on this period in between Latvia, Russia, and eventually Canada? the United States for some. This time in Rome.
I was aware, knowing the whole kind of arc of the immigration that Soviet Jews went through, that my family went through. The part, just superficially speaking, that always intrigued me the most was this very peculiar intermediate period which was in Rome. So it was a transmigration point. So what happened was Soviet Jews left the Soviet Union ostensibly to go to Israel. You couldn't leave unless you had a visa to go to Israel. And for certainly at the beginning of this wave of immigration, a lot of people did. And after a time, the real diehard Zionists had already emigrated, and you had people who were seeking the opportunity to leave, not because they were Zionists, but because they wanted to get out of the Soviet Union, because for any number of reasons. And these people started to, once they got to Vienna, say, okay, we want to declare refugee status. We don't want to go to Israel. Why should we? We'd like to go elsewhere. And then all of a sudden you had this strange phenomenon where you had thousands, at a certain point, tens of thousands of Soviet Jews in Rome and the surrounding areas. Ladispoli was one town, Ostia was another. And that was just so peculiar to me to think about. And I would listen to my parents and their friends talk about it. Remember that this is, the time of the Eastern Bloc, the Iron Curtain. These are people who never thought they'd get out of the Soviet Union. Many of them were people who had never been out of the Soviet Union. And to end up in all places in Rome, sort of in the cradle of Western civilization. Fascinating and romantic and all of these things. And I was seduced by that idea. And also this idea that it was this point, it was sort of like a pivot point between the future that was kind of still unclear for a lot of them, and the past, which was so very recent and still kind of held its claims on them. And, I wanted to tell the story of really this whole, the best way to explain it is I wanted to tell the story of the Soviet Jewish experience. And that I thought was the best place to do it, where to have people reflect back wouldn't feel like an affect. It would seem, viable, authentic, because they had just left this place and they were still coming to terms with it.
And they're not yet anything else. And in the same way you speak of women's qualities becoming exaggerated in front of the pre-epic Alec, I suppose that's true of all the players in this, pressure cooker of a moment, in which some get jobs, but others have to rely on shenanigans. And of course, Russia has, at the same time, as you point out, offloaded a lot of criminals who happen to be Jewish and dumped them into this forum. So was it a place in which people's qualities became sufficiently exaggerated for you to be able to have fun as an author with them?
Precisely that.